We'll be starting the meeting now. Welcome to the Wednesday, May 18th, 2020 Thurston County Planning Commission. The Thurston County Planning Commission is a citizens advisory commission to the Board of County Commissioners on land use planning matters such as comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance amendments. Planning Commission actions are in the form of recommendations to the county commissioners who are the final decision makers. All Planning Commission meetings are open to the public. Citizens are welcome to observe all Planning Commission briefings and work sessions. Public comment is allowed on those topics for which a public hearing has not yet been held. To start out our meeting this evening, we'll be doing an introduction to Planning Commissioners. I'm Eric Casino. I'm the chair of this season's Planning Commission, and I am from District 2. We'll go online first to the commissioners there, to Commissioner Hanson.
Commissioner Hanson, District 3.
And Commissioner Pestinger.
Commissioner Pestinger, District 1.
Let's start down here, Jeremy.
Barry Halverson, District 2, Yelm, Washington. Doug Carmen, District 2.
Scott Nelson, District 3.
Helen Wheatley, District 1.
Jim Simmons, District 3.
Derek Day, District 1.
Thank you. And I should mention that this is Commissioner Day's first meeting. We're happy to have him here. I don't know, would you like to say anything or make an introduction or anything? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you're welcome to.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my name is Derek Day, and I've lived in Olympia for nearly 10 years now, actually a little over 10 years. My day job, I am a public servant. I work for the Department of Ecology, and in my free time, I spend nearly all of it chasing fish and wildlife.
Fantastic. Well, welcome and thank you for participating. With that, we'll move on to the agenda for this evening as everybody had a chance to look at it. With that, I'd entertain a motion.
I move to approve the agenda.
So the motion has been made to approve the agenda. Is there any further discussion on this?
Yeah, I just noticed that our open space public hearing is set for 7:30.
So we might have to wait around for it if we have to, and we could move in a work session in between if we need to fill the space.
Like work session.
Yeah. I'm sure we could always bring it back for a little bit more if we have to.
I got all night.
Yes.
So we did notice the open space for 7 p.m. or soon thereafter.
Oh, okay.
So if we get to it sooner than 7 o'clock on this
Then we
agenda,
can proceed.
we can proceed if you so choose.
All right, with that, then we'll call for the vote. All right. Okay. Okay.
Are we supposed to?
Well, usually when I call for the vote, we do it individually, and that's something that has been requested of us, but on approving the agenda, I'm sure we'll be just fine. So the agenda is approved. With that, has everybody had an opportunity to look at the meeting minutes from May 4th, 2002?
Yeah.
Commissioner Wheatley.
I'm afraid I have comment.
All right, let's go through them.
Well, I actually would like to request, because I believe at our next meeting, we're going to be coming back to this, or not. Well, maybe I'm wrong. I thought I read somewhere that we were going to come back to this fairly soon, like the stuff on the wireless code update. And I think that the minutes on the wireless code update need to be done, unfortunately. I just spent some time listening to them and finding a lot of omissions or things that that commissioners said that were not included, or things that Ms. Nelson said that I thought were important about things that the commissioners might want to do or think about that didn't quite make it in. So I'd like to have that part of the minutes revisited with a little more attention to calling out the things where commissioners might want to have further discussion. So in particular, I mean, just for one example, in the discussion about, I mean, this is just in the very first paragraph, the discussion about the role of remember we were talking about the road right-of-ways, and something was kind of characterized in a way that didn't make it clear that this was something that the commission could make recommendations on. For example, you know, that where Ms. Nelson said that the commission could consider making a recommendation, but it didn't quite make it into the minutes. So there are a couple of places like that where I think it's important for that to be there. Because part of this is a record for the commissioner, the county commissioners, and for commissioners who weren't present at the last meeting. And we have one of those, I think, to be able to review this. So
I want to think that the where we finished off with the discussion on the meetings was not so much that this 3-page summary of the meetings was official, but that the recording, the audio recording is the official record of the planning commission. And so I would think that with that being the official record, this 3 or 4 page summary is not nearly as important. Is that, am I misremembering this?
No, that's what we said.
this is true. But we also have our rules and procedures. I'm not sure we can expect the commissioners to listen to a 2-hour recording. So I guess I would leave it at, I'm planning to vote against this because I would like that part of the minutes redone. And I'm explaining why at this point.
Very fair. Very fair. Okay. Go ahead, Doug.
Perhaps we ought to say in the minutes that the same statement we say in the agenda, that the official record is the audio.
Yeah.
It is in here? Did I miss it?
Paragraph 3. Yeah. Okay.
Well, we may want to just revisit our rules and procedures at some point.
I think that's a fair thing too. All right.
I move that we approve the meeting minutes and accept the audio as the official meeting record.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Call for the vote.
No discussion.
Oh, we will have discussion. You're right.
I just want to go the other way. As I said at the last meeting, this is part of the problem with the more in-depth these minutes get, the more there's problems. And that's always been the situation. So my preference would be to go to shorter minutes.
Any other discussion?
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Commissioner Pestinger.
I feel like Commissioner Wheatley is repeatedly asking for something that is a very reasonable thing, which is simply for the existing structure of the meeting minutes to more accurately record some of the most important things that were discussed. And I've heard a myriad of arguments from staff and fellow planning commissioners of why that couldn't and shouldn't be done. But I disagree with all of them. I think she's asking for something very reasonable, and I support her, and I will also vote against approval of these meeting minutes for that reason.
Yeah, in response to the, more isn't necessarily better, I agree with that. I understand that point. But I think that there's a way of writing the minutes where it doesn't have to be more, but it's perhaps in the structuring of the minutes. And that's why I think a revisit of the rules and procedures might be helpful at some point, because it's, there's 5 objectives to minutes. And 2 and 3 are the ones that I referenced. Provide a summary of what occurred for use by the planning commissioner who misses a meeting, or to refresh memories. And 3, to provide the board of county commissioners with enough information to be able to follow what the planning commission is doing. And it does then provide a suggestion for prioritization of how these are written up. And I think if we just spent some time discussing what would be a helpful way to tweak it, it may be possible to not make it over long, but to make it more accurate and more useful for our purposes. So, but at the same time, I also feel that there were inaccuracies in the minutes. And I don't, and therefore I can't agree. Anyway.
Okay, anybody else?
But I'd like to know what the inaccuracies.
Sure. Well, for example, there are some things that are perhaps omitted that would make it more accurate. I mean, I don't know, it would take a lot of time to get into the weeds, and I don't want to hold it up, but I have a lot of notes I'm happy to share with you after the meeting, perhaps, because I don't want to take too much time, but just my first page of listening to the minutes and writing comments, I have both of my margins full of comments where things were omitted or not completely stated. And therefore, I don't think that it fully reflects what was talked about.
I only say that, because it's, if there's something that's inaccurate in what was written, then I'm all for making those corrections to the meeting minutes as a correction to the minutes.
Okay, well, I can just give one real quick that I'm just looking at here because I'm the one that did this. We may recall that we talked about prioritization.
Right.
And we talked about how that can be addressed in the purpose statement. And we talked about how I had provided this may be a little different. I had provided an example of graphics at an earlier meeting. Well, it just simply says an example of graphics was requested at a previous meeting. And that's not accurate. It was provided by a commissioner and discussed in an earlier meeting. I mean, that's a pretty minor thing, but there are some things like the discussion about, and part of this may be also related to how difficult it is to hear the recording sometimes, but at minute 15, there was some discussion about testing. And some of it, which would be 1, 2, 3, paragraph 4, I think there was a lot of discussion that just never made it in. And I think this testing issue was very important. And I think that it was suggested in regard to the testing issue that the commission could consider writing something up as part of the recommendation. But that part of the discussion was kind of lost. And so you wouldn't necessarily remember that was included, that we might consider including some statement as a commission about that. And that's similar to the discussion about macro facilities. There was a similar place where what was kind of lost was the discussion by Ms. Nelson about how the commission could have input into it as part of its final recommendation.
Do you feel like that most of the issues that you see in the minutes are omissions and not inaccuracies, other than inaccuracies by omission?
Yeah, I think that's what it often is.
Okay.
Sometimes there are inaccuracies, like here's another one that I just noted. Commissioner, this is page 3, line 1. Commissioner Testinger question safety measures code 20.33 170B. Well, it's actually, he said 20.30 170B. And that's a real minor thing. It's a real minor quibble, but I just, at a certain point, that there are inaccuracies there.
All right. Anything else?
So I'm gonna say, I don't think, I think missing something by omission is not necessarily an inaccuracy. But the one you just brought up, that, I mean, in our minutes, I think that needs, I don't remember exactly, but if that's what he said, that needs to be changed.
Okay, I'll do page 3.
And I'll defer to Commissioner Pestinger.
Commissioner Pessinger, did you feel like you were, oh yeah, oh, it should be 30. Okay,
I'd be willing to move to table the approval of the minutes until we can maybe make some revisions for the
I
next
don't,
meeting, June 1st.
well, we already have a motion that's been made and seconded, but we can still make this amend this meeting minutes to reflect the appropriate code, which would be 30.33.170B. Was there any objections to amending the code to the appropriate one?
No, and I would say if there's any other specific inaccuracies in the verbiage, and I think if we could bring those out, we could also amend that particular piece.
All right, yeah, I mean, because there is, I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, it's complex.
Right.
It's a complex issue
It was
as it is,
complex.
but there was one that concerned me where I believe Ms. Nelson said testing is an option, and that didn't make it in, that's the kind of thing it's important to know that testing is an option,
Okay.
even if there's a but there.
Well, we do have a motion and it's been seconded. The motion is to approve the meeting minutes of May 4th as 2022 and accept the audio as the official meeting record. With that, call for the vote.
Commissioner Hanson,
I'll abstain because I was not present.
Commissioner Wheatley,
Nay.
Commissioner Helverson,
Aye.
Commissioner Carmen,
Aye.
Commissioner Casino,
Aye.
Commissioner Simmons,
All right.
Commissioner Nelson,
All right.
Commissioner Day.
Stay.
Motion passes with 5. Okay, with that, go ahead.
I guess I would ask, what we've done in the past is that we have, the commissioners have read the minutes before the meeting and came prepared with what changes and inaccuracies were ready to make a motion so that we don't spend all night. So I would ask that we all do that in the future.
And I will respond to that because I agree, and I listened to the minutes and I took notes because I wanted to listen to what I said. But I became concerned about this particular section because it's a very important section for our future work. And I decided that there was too much for that, and that's why I requested that. That's why I decided it would make more sense to request that we come back to it at another time and give the staff an opportunity to review this because there were so many that it would have taken as long as it's taken anyway.
But it would have been specific.
Okay.
All right.
Julie knows.
We'll be moving on to item number 3, which is public communication. At this time, we'll be taking testimony from the public to the Planning Commission. Those participating via Zoom, please choose the raise your hand option if you wish to address the Planning Commission. You'll be promoted to a panelist when it is your turn to speak and be seen. To be seen, please turn on your camera. If you are dialing in, press *9 to raise your hand. Make sure you also choose *6 to unmute yourself. The 3-minute timer will show on one of the video screens to help keep track of time. If you have issues speaking and being heard, please disconnect from the Zoom meeting and call 360-972-6785 to make your public comment. I should also mention at this time that we're not taking public comment for anything that we've had public hearings on before, or for the 2 public hearings we're having later in today's meeting. We'll take public comment separately for those when we hold those hearings. With that, we'll start in the room first. If there's anybody here that would like to address the board, please, sir. Oh, with the other office, great. Okay, online, then we'll move to Phyllis Farrell. Phyllis, please.
Good afternoon or evening. Can you hear me?
You can, Phyllis, thank you.
Thank you. Greetings and good evening, commissioners. Phyllis Farrell, Sunwood Lakes neighborhood in unincorporated Thurston County. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I've got two brief comments. One regarding these hybrid meetings. I'm really grateful for these hybrid meetings. They've increased public participation. They're really convenient for us, those of us at home. We save a lot of time traveling, not to mention gasoline and the reduction in emissions. But at a recent last week resident advisory group meeting with Josh Cummings and the planning staff, we discussed some suggestions, and Josh indicated that a recommendation from the Planning Commission would lend weight to convey to public information staff and the Board of County Commissioners. So our resident advisory group has representatives from the Local Good Governance Coalition, the League of Women Voters, Audubon, and Sierra Club. And we suggest that number one, the participant faces be shown when speaking. And I noticed that you're doing that tonight. So that is already accomplished. Secondly, that the participants be able to see the list of participants so we know who else is attending. That would be helpful for us. Possibly allowing participants to submit questions via chat during and after staff presentations. The staff could respond at the time or later via email. And the Zoom participants could also see the questions, which might have a synergistic effect. I know the concern there might be Zoom bombers, but perhaps the questions could be routed through Polly or staff facilitator contact. I noticed that we already have and thank you, Polly, a number for troubleshooting. So that's it in terms of the Zoom suggestions that we are hoping you can convey to the county commissioners and public information staff. Secondly, another topic would be the inclusion of climate change in all of your planning recommendations. And the upcoming comp plan, our SMP, all of these planning documents. At this time, we'd like you to make sure that considerations of climate change be included. We expect legislation to require that, but we would also like the county to get ahead of that. And reminders that the Thurston County has already committed to the goals of the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. So to make sure that those topics are included in any planning recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. Next up, we have, I'm having a hard time reading, but it's Olympia Indivisible Communications.
That's what it looks like to me.
Olympia Indivisible Communications, you're up. Did they just disappear?
No,
Okay.
you need
You need to unmute.
Hello, I'm really Madeline Bishop, and I think it's just because I used this link last time is why I got called the communication team. So I apologize for that. And I'm Madeline Bishop, and I live in unincorporated Thurston County out near Lake St. Clair. And I'm asking you to start working on a strong community engagement process for the 2-year comprehensive plan update as soon as possible. The county needs to incorporate the policies spelled out in HB 1220 and HB 1099. We need a plan with policies and development processes. We need active statements about what exactly will be accomplished, not what should be done. So please, let's get this conversation started. It's really important for the staff to start working on this now. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Madeline. Up next, we have Loretta Sepinen. Are you there, Loretta?
I'm sorry to take some time to come online. The technology is slower than one might expect. I live in Olympia, and I am here to talk about the same subject that Madeline talked about. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to draw attention to a matter that's really going to consume a lot of your time and our community's time in the next 2.5 years. And it isn't quite on your plate yet, but I'm asking you, as Madeline did, to start work on it now. And that is updating our 11 chapters of our comprehensive plan, which gives the vision for what what we as a community, as a county, want to accomplish. And it's a vision for the year 2045, I believe, so a long-term vision. I want us to particularly work on affordable housing and also on getting that Thurston climate mitigation plan that the county has accepted, but getting that down to the level of specific policies and specific code language. That's going to take a lot of work. And particularly on the issue of housing, it may seem like that's mostly a matter that falls to the cities and incorporated areas. But I received some information that Thurston Regional Planning Council has done is that we have a big gap in the availability in the unincorporated Thurston County for people who are of lower income. And that affordability gap is what the bill 2012 really was about, or 1220 was really about, and we need to work on that. This year, we need to include a lot more people in the process than we have in the previous time that we did a comprehensive update. And I encourage you to work with the newly being formed Thurston County's Council on Racial Equity and Inclusion. I think that that will be a way to outreach to new communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else online that would like to address the Planning Commission? Raise your hand. Christy White, you're up. Christy, are you there?
There we go. Had to move to the technology. I think you guys can hear me now.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Oh, so different. So tonight I just wanted to mention a little bit about process. As you're looking at code changes and reviewing the topics before you, that perhaps you could ask of the planning department to have more of a consistent presentation. One of the things I've noticed is that some topics are presented in a very detailed format with, you know, screens and line by line by line going through everything so that you can really see what it is that you're reviewing and changing. While others, maybe you're getting hard documents and you aren't really getting that presentation line by line in the Planning Commission meetings. And I just think it might be helpful in a more consistent approach as you're looking at the various topics before you. So that was just my thoughts for this evening. Until later.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else online that would like to address the Planning Commission? All right, well, with that, we'll close the public communications part of our regular Planning Commission, and we are moments away from our first public hearing for tonight. So I'll give us 10 more seconds. That's good. With that, we will be opening the public hearing. Today, we are here to hold a public hearing on Development Code Docket Item A27, the non-conforming code update to the Critical Areas Ordinance. This is a virtual public hearing. Those wishing to testify have joined by Zoom, phone, emailed in comment, or mailed in comment. If you wish to testify, please choose the raise your hand option. If you're dialing in, press *9 to raise your hand. I will call your name and unmute, and you'll be unmuted when it is your turn to speak. Please make sure also to choose *6 to unmute yourself. If you have issues speaking or being heard, please disconnect from the Zoom meeting and call 360-972-6785. We will have a timer for all public comment. Each person will have 3 minutes to testify. I will call you out individually for oral testimony. When you hear your name, please unmute yourself. You may turn on your camera to testify. Your time may not be given to another person. When testifying, please provide your name and address for the record. And we will now ask staff to review the public comment timer for the public.
Okay, so the timer will give you 3 minutes, and the first 2.5 minutes will be green. When you get to 2 minutes, 30 seconds, it turns yellow. And at 3 o'clock or 3 minutes, you're out of time and it'll be red.
Thank you, Polly. This public hearing is now open. We will start with a staff presentation with Ashley Array to provide background information, written comments submitted for a public hearing, and any additional information requested by the Planning Commission.
Sorry, I'm focused on that public comment timer. I think we need to get one for my little children. Good evening, commissioners. For the record, my name is Ashley Rye with Community Planning. Can everyone on the screen hear me? Thumbs up. Okay. Today we are here to hold a public hearing on proposed amendments to the existing non-conforming uses, structures, and lots chapter of the Critical Areas Ordinance, otherwise known as Title 24. The purpose of this chapter is to establish provisions for developing and redeveloping existing uses, structures, and lots affected by critical areas that don't conform to the Critical Areas Ordinance. The proposed amendments would expand administrative review authority for small-scale projects with minimal, if no, impact on critical area functions. A few examples of those would be altering single-family homes within existing building footprints, regardless of improvement value, allowing landward additions into buffers that have been verified as functionally isolated, and allowing more flexible siting options similar to what we do for riparian areas within wetland buffers, provided any impacts are properly mitigated. The administrative review of these projects would be processed under the county's critical area review permit provisions, which do include 3 review criteria. The section of the code for that review criteria states that any requested development activity shall be consistent with the requirements, purposes, and intent of Title 24. They should be consistent with the goals and policies of the Thurston County Comprehensive Plan, and they shall result in no net loss of the functions and values of critical areas as defined in Title 24. If the approval authority determines that it's necessary, the proposal shall include a mitigation plan, which includes that mitigation sequencing consistent with Title 24, and credible scientific evidence as determined by the director. Mitigation measures shall address any impacts and shall occur on-site first, or if necessary, off-site. So rather than the reasonable use exception, that would be the administrative review criteria. The Planning Commission has held 2 work sessions on the non-conforming code update, all of which have been open to the public. Written notice of this public hearing was published in the Olympian on April 25th. In addition, a webmail announcement was sent to the Community Planning Division's email listserv on May 6th, and a press release was issued on the same day. The Thurston County Community Planning Department did update our website with all available documents being considered at this hearing, including the public comments received as of noon today. So as of noon, actually, as of 4, we have 10 unique public comments that were received. General themes did include concerns regarding any undermining of the use of best available science, increased human use within critical areas, and general support of the proposed amendments. Since posting the public comments earlier today, we did receive an additional comment from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's short, and so I'm just going to read it into the record since I don't have copies. They said regarding section 24.50.020D, functional isolation, WDFW suggests that the county include language in the CAO requiring concurrence from Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Ecology and Tribes when the county is determined that a functionally isolated buffer or functional isolation exists before approving the land use. And we'll make sure all of that is provided on the web or on our website as of tomorrow.
Could you repeat that again? Just
Yeah.
to be sure that
I do have a few copies if you want a copy, but I'm
Okay,
happy to repeat it for the rest. Okay, I can give you a copy of that. And that concludes staff's presentation.
All right, thank you very much. We will then take testimony from the public, and we will start out in the boardroom here today with John Cosley.
Good evening. I'm here, my name's John Cosley. I'm here with my wife, Melody. We own property at 3125 46th Avenue Northwest, which is out on Cooper Point. And we actually sit on the north side of the Green Cove inlet to the Elbe. So we purchased property just almost a year ago, a little less than a year ago. Our intention, it has an older house on it. We felt that that was something that we wanted to, fix up and clean up the property. The property had been a little bit lacked, maintenance. And so we've been sort of working on that. But as it is, I guess what you would call a legal non-conforming structure. It's been there for, I don't know, 50 or 60 years, I guess. So the things that are going on in this ordinance pertain to us very specifically. And so we've been kind of following it. We've been very happy to go over, and we've provided, comments, in written comments, actually, that are included in the documents. But so I won't go over those really too much with my remaining time, but I think the only thing I'd like to say is that, we believe that, we consider ourselves conservationists. We're all about maintaining the habitat, and we actually have worked very hard while we've been on our property, trying to restore some of the things that have been, degraded over time. We have these things called kudzu vines that have destroyed, probably a dozen trees on our property. And I've spent countless hours trying to cut those down and, save the remaining trees. So to us, this is the notion that we're going to want to do something that would further degrade, the habitat there is really offensive, I guess, in a way. It's not to say that there aren't other cases where that might apply, but for us, we believe that, first of all, we're landowners. We have certain rights as landowners. I mean, I see the sign up here says rights. Yeah, we pay taxes on that property, just like anybody else pays taxes on their property. So we expect to be able to do things that are reasonable, things that aren't going to be, a major impact on our environment and on the habitat of, the wildlife around us. In fact, we want to enhance that, if anything. So we were very pleased when we saw the proposed changes that came out. We reviewed them carefully, and we felt pretty good about all of them. I mean, there may be some things where, perhaps certain things might need a little more clarity. Obviously, what is what constitutes something requiring administrative review versus the RUE, for example. What's the dividing line there? It wasn't very clear. It says small projects. What does that mean? So, we totally see that there's probably some more clarity maybe that needs there. But I'm out of time. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyway, I just want to finish with thanking the staff. We think they're very reasonable items in there. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Next up would be Brandon.
Chartrey.
Chartrey, thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name's Brandon Chartrey. I started building custom homes with Eli Cumbus in this county in 1990, licensed contractor since 2004. So I have been very involved in this process. I've gone through RUE process before. I deal all the time with all the shoreline stuff, all the mitigation plans, restoration work, mitigation projects. I've been through it all over the last, 20 years. I am excited to see that you guys are taking some steps because when I started building, I definitely think things were definitely kind of still a little bit, good old boy network where we could get away with some stuff that, probably shouldn't have been doing. And I think that the pendulum has swung where we've been really just butting our heads against the wall, trying to get anything to go. And had our UE process take up to 2 years. I'm in one up and down 9 months. I still haven't got a commission hearing yet. So I think that I'm glad that we're addressing some of this and trying to streamline this. I also think that there's more that can be done in this permitting process to streamline things. I've been waiting for multiple permits this year. I've had 3 permits in. I have not, I got 1 out so far, one submitted in January. Around the 19th, another one early February, still no permits. And these are completed packages. These are not stuff I know. These are, they're in, they're ready, they're waiting review. And I understand the hiring freeze. I understand what happened. But I think we can do more. I think we can figure out how to outsource. I think we can figure out how to do some things that are moving these things along, because exactly right. I think that there's been a point where permitting has reached a point where it's an obstruction of property rights. It's taking so long that you're not able to develop property, or we wait so long to get a permit that interest rates change, that banking change, that, by the time I submit an application, I've already got a contract signed with a customer and I wait 6 months or 5 months for a building permit. And, prices have gone up 20%, 30%, and I can't honor my contracts. And so I think streamlining this is so important to everybody that's ever been through a construction process. And so I love the steps that we're taking here. And I think that exactly right, defining a small project or what we're allowed to do, there's some more definition that needs to happen in this. But I really commend the work that you guys are doing here. So thanks for your time and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I'm new to the hearing process. So are we allowed to ask questions at the end of folks who've given testimony or during testimony? Or
Generally speaking, no.
No. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have a conversation.
With that, we'll move to our online guests. First up would be, is that Charlotte Parson? Charlotte?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Charlotte Persons and I live in Northeast Olympia. Title 24 states that its purpose is to protect critical areas. And you have read many comments about how the proposed code changes will open the door to a flood of development in critical areas. And the resulting increased human occupation and activities would negatively impact the important functions of critical areas. Besides protecting our natural environment, critical areas protect people from flooding, landslides, and drinking water pollution. Please reject the proposed code changes to preserve our critical areas. Just as important, 24.01.050 of Title 24 states, the Growth Management Act requires jurisdictions to consider the best available science in developing policies and development regulations to designate and protect critical areas. However, the proposed new code does not use the best available science. Specifically, the new paragraph D in 24.50.020 it's titled Functional Isolation. It proposes that under some circumstances, structures can be built in riparian areas, wetlands, and pond buffers outside the footprint of current non-conforming structures. According to the staff presentation on April 20th, paragraph D relies on draft Department of Ecology guidelines for wetlands. First, these guidelines are still in draft form and may be changed before final publication. In fact, as you may know now from the letter you got from Department of Fish and Wildlife, Those guidelines are in opposition to Department of Fish and Wildlife guidance that states that upland areas should be conserved in wetland areas. Second, and just as important, the DE guidelines state that jurisdictions should offer guidance about the kinds of topographical breaks and physical barriers that functionally isolate critical areas. Paragraph D does not do that. Perhaps the Planning Commission should remove paragraph D from the proposed code updates. Then newly formulated code changes that refer to finalized DE guidance can be introduced during the comprehensive plan update. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed code changes.
Thank you, Charlotte. Up next would be Esther Cronenberg. Esther, you're still muted. Esther, you'll have to *6 to unmute your, there you go.
All right, thanks. Yeah, hi. My name is Esther Cronenberg. I live on 36th Avenue Northwest off Cooper Point. I speak as an advocate for protecting our critical water resources to oppose these code changes. At present, the county does not routinely monitor thousands of chemicals that are used daily everywhere in the county that easily leach into the soils and ground and surface waters. It has a steady backlog of more than 100 failing septic systems identified of the thousands that inevitably degrade and begin to fail that are not being monitored. The county hasn't enforced violations of environmental law for years, except for egregious failures of septic systems, while permitting 2,000 or more new units of housing. The Community Planning and Economic Development Department used to be called Resource Stewardship. It's clear since the name change about 5 years ago that the focus of this department has been development to the detriment of our resources. This shift in focus will have long-term consequences we all will suffer. I understand there are circumstances in which someone may want to enclose a porch or create a mother-in-law unit. I think people who have lived on their properties for years and face changing circumstances or who wish to make reasonable improvements should be allowed to make these changes if the effects of these changes are properly analyzed for their consequences on the environment, as current code dictates. Because you can't separate one property out of an ecosystem and pretend it doesn't have an effect. It's like two people in a boat. One takes out a drill and starts boring a hole under his seat, and the other says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm just drilling under my seat. It's none of your business." In other words, when it comes to critical areas, we're all affected. We need the protections written into the current code. We need to base our policies on the facts provided by good science, which the current policy does. We should follow the advice of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're losing farmland, green spaces, an alarming amount of wildlife, which should be enough of a reason and a wake-up call why this code should not be changed to make it easier to continue down the path of development above all other considerations. It's only a matter of time when these losses will be threatening our drinking water, the basis of all public health. And what will our properties be worth then when the water is contaminated beyond repair? Critical areas are just that, critical. And we should do all we can to protect them because ultimately we're protecting ourselves and our children. Please leave the code as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Phyllis Farrell, you're next.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Phyllis Farrell, living in Sunwood Lakes, unincorporated Thurston County. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on item A27, non-conforming code update regarding critical area ordinances of Title 24. The current codes were developed to protect environmentally sensitive critical areas. The proposals would allow alterations to existing non-conforming property structures in critical areas and subject them to review to administrative review, then by a hearing examiner. Such staff administrative review, even though with the safeguards that were outlined by staff earlier could be subjective, overlook best available science requirements, and unfairly subject county staff vulnerable to permit applicant pressures from property owners. No net loss isn't working, and staff, there are staff issues associated with monitoring and enforcing mitigation efforts. So I wouldn't count on mitigation efforts being adequate. Critical areas are by definition to be protected from development, and there should be no modification in existing critical areas, threatening already fragile ecological functions. Avoid the quote, death by 1,000 cuts. Changing the code would encourage more applicant requests and development modifications, increased use and environmental impacts. In conclusion, do not adapt development code changes impacting critical areas.
Thank you, Phyllis. Next up, we have Marianne Tompkins. Has Marianne been promoted?
My apologies. I'm the one who did that. Anyway, sorry about that. So I want to talk about this critical area ordinance from a person who's going through it right now. I have 5 acres. It is in unincorporated Thurston County. It's 73rd Avenue Northeast in Olympia. And it is mostly wetland, mostly critical areas. It has a seasonal creek that runs through it. I have spent a lot of money on wetland reports and restoration on this property. 2 years after understandably complying with county regulations around protections, I started my build with the knowledge that costs and fees went up. My property has a non-developable parcel behind me, and that same seasonal creek that flows from my property through that parcel goes all the way to Zangle Cove. I purchased this land knowing of the critical areas and to protect it. A mile or so up the road from me, an applicant received approval of a reasonable use exception to reduce a standard 50-foot landslide hazard area buffer to 30 feet for a new single-family residence. Now, this is just an example of an exception from the county. Changing the current ordinance has me really worried. It would create vulnerability not only to the property behind me, but others like it. And it's going to give a green light to developers and make it easier for more people applying for reasonable use exceptions in areas that should be protected. So the property behind me has a ravine, and as I said, it has the same seasonal creek as mine. And I've seen developers fill these in and build. It happened in the neighborhood I grew up in before protections. As a builder previously mentioned, if there weren't protections in place, and everything we alter on our properties does affect our neighbors. I have a well, and we were told, you know, the critical areas that protect the drinking water that we all rely on, it also, those critical areas and our neighbors protect our water as well. So we need to be good neighbors. We need to be landowners and accept our responsibility as stewards of these critical areas and wetlands. If we're going to purchase these properties, we know what we're accepting as owners of these lands. So please leave the current code in place. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. Up next, we have Sue Danner.
Denver, come on, Sue.
Sue, you're still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, good evening. My name is Sue Danver and I live off of Delphi in Western Thurston County. I wholeheartedly support the Black Hills Audubon Society written testimony sent to you May 15th. I support statements by Esther Cronenberg and Phyllis Farrell and Charlotte Persons and the last speaker. Until the proposed code amendments can be shown to conform to best available science and have no negative effects on functional critical areas, Black Hills urged the Planning Commission to reject the proposed code amendments, and I do too. My observations and concerns. Honor the time, energy, and scientific scrutiny in the construction of the critical area code in around 2010, when that our code was made, and it was a lengthy, very arduous effort to protect our ecosystems and water quality and quantity. And so it seems that we should continue to honor it because it was definitely hard work. Since 2001, I have worked extensively with Thurston County Planning Department, legal staff, and hearing examiners. Over these years, I have watched the staff shrink by perhaps 50%. A lot, I don't know what it is. In general, the land use staff from 2000 to 2010, when there were more, were trained and well-versed in SEPA. There was a desire to observe environmental rules and help the citizen navigate the rules and codes. Jump to the present. With seasoned staff retiring and staff reductions, it is often more difficult to even contact knowledgeable staff. Staff are preoccupied by major projects such as this comprehensive plan update, or they are unfamiliar with pertinent science. Also, 3, with no fee and only staff discretion on making decisions to these permits, there could be a deluge of applications. So staff would feel pressure to accept applications quickly, and quantity of approvals could trump quality reviews. Also, any increase in human occupation and activities in critical areas will reduce their effectiveness. Please leave the current code in place. Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Sue. Is there anybody else online that would like to address the Planning Commission? That would be AAP 1419, maybe? AAP 1419? 3419? You'll have to unmute.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm on my work computer, and that happens to be my work badge number. So anyway, Jason Mosbar, I live out at Black Lake. We have property that we bought about 8 years ago. We knew that there were some issues with the property, and we've been trying to make steps just on our own, trying to correct some of those items. A lot of unpermitted things happened here as well. And we're in the process right now with the county, and it's been disappointing for us. We're probably 3 years in working with the county, trying to navigate through everything, hiring specialists, biologists, whatever else, to make sure we're doing the right thing. But we're in favor of the amendments, mostly because it's gonna allow us to be able to make the corrections to this home, especially the, the structure, the existing structure of the home. The improvements can only be 50% of the existing structure. And in the 3-year period that we've kind of been navigating through this. Material costs have skyrocketed. We can't, for the amount of money, we can't do the repairs. We can't do the fixes. We can't do the things, and we're all ready to do whatever we need to do to get it back in compliance, back to code. So, you know, we're in favor of this. It's going to allow us to spend the correct amount of money and make the correct changes out here. Otherwise, we're kind of painted in a corner, and we're not going to be able to do any of that. So we're in favor of what the amendments say at this point. So I think that's, excuse me, I think that's it. Thank you very much for letting me speak with you or speak to you this afternoon, and good luck with moving forward.
Thank you, Jason. Is there anybody else online? Christy White.
Good evening, commissioners.
Good evening.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Thank you. So, you know, listening to the testimony regarding this code changes, I still have the sense that there's more work that needs to be done, that the original code, much like some of the other codes that we have on the books, were written years ago with extraordinary amount of effort and detail and real in-depth analysis, and that perhaps this code as it stands needs a little bit more adjustment to help, because I understand from listening to the speakers who are trying to, you know, do something on their property, the challenges, the costs, all of that, but that there is probably a middle ground that still needs to be found with this code to make it acceptable for the county. And, you know, our critical areas, to echo the other speakers, you know, our water is our water. It has to be protected, and there's a reason why they're called critical areas. So I would encourage you to perhaps, you know, take a second look at this code, get further public input, and perhaps a stakeholders group to really analyze this and see if you can find that win-win on this. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Would anybody else online like to address the Planning Commission? Seeing nobody else wishing to address us, I'll close this public hearing. Yeah, you can. You have not spoken yet. Please take the stand.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Melody Cosley, John's wife, and so he's giving you a little bit of background here. But in listening to tonight's discussion, I think the point that I'd like to make is that I think we're discussing legally established non-conforming structures here. These are structures that came with the land way before the critical areas were adopted, okay? So what Christy was just saying here is we need to find some middle ground. We all live in these areas because we appreciate them, we want to protect them, we are good stewards of the land. And so I feel like we're all on the same page here in terms of trying to protect our private property rights, but also be good stewards of the land. And so there needs to be a balance. The 50% valuation, I agree with what Jason, the fellow online, was saying. It's cost prohibitive. We want to build a passive solar home. We want to have high energy efficiency in our home, and it's going to be wiped out before we even get out of the ground if we have a 50% valuation. So, you know, I think we need to look at factors of this to allow the goal of balancing human use with protecting our resources and protecting our wildlife and protecting our waters and our aquifers. So that's what I want to leave you with. It's not an easy challenge, but I think we can get there if we all kind of put our heads together and figure out how we deal with not taking away a person's private property rights or our ability to use our property. I mean, we pay, like John was saying earlier, we pay taxes, as the county takes a lot of tax money from us every year, and yet we're not supposed to use our property for residential use or be able to have our mother-in-law come live with me and have a bedroom for her if it's needed, I mean, so that's what I want to leave you with tonight. Thank you for hearing me.
No, thank you very much. All right, with that, we will close this public hearing. And we would normally have a work session and maybe recommendation, but we are bumping up against our next timeline. But before we let you go, does any commissioners have anything to leave Ashley with to bring back for us at our next work session after anything specific? Go ahead, Barry.
You mentioned the WDFW thing. They're requesting to be able to review a document if the section functional isolation is used as the requirement for granting a permit. Is that correct?
Yeah, essentially, before our staff at the
Right.
county make a finding that an area is functionally isolated, that they would also be able to review whatever reports or documentation that we would receive here at the county.
Right.
And yeah.
So you would
see
put
that before
you
we
would
make
put
final.
that in paragraph D?
Yes, we can put that in paragraph D.
Okay.
Now, they are mostly looking at habitat conservation areas, riparian areas.
Right.
And so we probably want to check with Department of Ecology and the tribes to see if they want to just look at those areas. Because we have that existing provision for wetlands already.
Okay. Do you, go ahead. Then I'd request that we do that first. Second, paragraph 24.50.040, construction, restoration, and replacement, subparagraph D. It says the necessary applications to restore or replacing legally established non-conforming structures and or normal residential appurtenances shall be made within 24 months of the date the damage or destruction occurred, and the work shall be completed within 2 years of permit issuance. Where did the 2 years come from? Why is it limited to 2 years like this? It seems just kind of like an arbitrary number, and
Let me look,
yeah.
at the top of my head, I can't remember why 2 years. It was probably based on research into a lot of other county codes.
Because what I've seen in county codes recently is 36 months or 48 months.
Okay.
So
I can definitely
Yeah.
take a look at that.
Do you know if that you've had the policies and procedures developed yet to see where the cutoff is between an administrative and a hearing examiner review?
So the way it's structured in the code is doesn't really have like a definition of small scale projects. It's more where changes are able to take place. And so we haven't actually changed we haven't changed the square footage that is already allowed to be developed within a buffer area. That's staying the same. It's really just a shifting in where that project takes place within the buffer rather than the size of the project. And so I'd be happy to chat with folks and try to understand what kind of additional definition they're looking for, and see how to integrate that.
You have something that you'd like her to bring back?
Yeah, following on to that, it sounds to me, I mean, a question, the question I would like to have a longer conversation about is where going before a hearing examiner is the issue versus it sounds like for a lot of people, the issue is the valuation issue, the substantive improvement issue. And I've heard from the testimony, a plea to look for middle ground. And it sounds like that is one of the places, that's kind of the key area where there's a question. This question, on the one hand, it's a policy change and not a clarification right now. And I think that's very important. And it was not, I said that before and that wasn't reflected in the memo, but there are policy changes here. And that's one of them where it goes from it has to remain a non-substantive improvement to making any improvement at any cost possible. So that's quite a profound change. And I think that's what triggered the concern that it could cause a green light for development that is not intended for a critical area. So it seems to me that in particular, maybe it's worth separating out this issue of substantive development and understanding why that's not allowed in the critical areas ordinance right now, in order to better discuss why it might possibly be altered to some degree, and how we can separate that from the question of whether these matters go before the hearing examiner or not. Because I didn't at least get from the hearing and the written, I still am not clear that that in particular is an obstacle so much as it seems like it's this substantive improvement issue. So I would like to understand how those things are different and where there, what thoughts might be developed around the substantive improvement issue, understanding, flagging for the commissioners, for the county commissioners, that this is a policy change and not a clarification.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything that you'd like her to bring back to the next work session? Go ahead, Doug.
I think in line with Helen's point is that the way I look at this is it's not for new construction, basically. It's for existing construction and modifications thereof. And you can't build outside the footprint. You might be able to enclose a porch or that type of thing, or go into the behind the home to do it. But it's not, we heard a lot of testimony about development, how the builders are going to take advantage of it and build all these houses on wetlands for this. That isn't what this is for. It's to help people to remodel their homes within a reasonable price range without being limited to a dollar maximum amount. Because like you put solar panels on a roof, now that the federal tax credit's going out, that's going to be more. Or having to spend all that money on a hearing examiner is a waste of time and money. We heard testimony earlier about we need lower cost housing. Well, you can't have lower cost housing if you just throw fees on top of fees on top of fees. So I think we need to differentiate between that so that the public understands and we all understand exactly what it's covering.
All right, let's wrap this conversation up and on to our next.
May I just have one follow-up? Since
Yeah,
I'm going to be
go ahead.
preparing a memo. So in regards to the alteration question and that in the value component, I did try to address it in the staff report with policy language that I was able to find it at the state level. If that isn't enough, would you like a matrix of how other counties in the Puget Sound region address it? Because that is something I've already researched and could provide. I'm just trying to get guidance on what information is needed for the next work session.
For me, I don't need any more information. I think we need more discussion amongst us, but I don't know if I actually need any more information. Is there specific information that you needed?
Well, I don't want to.
Commissioner Whaley?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of questions about best available science. I'm just thinking that if one were to not change code regarding the fact that it goes to a hearing examiner, in other words, doesn't go, it doesn't expand administrative review, there is still this key issue of how much people can fix up their homes, basically. So I would like, if you're going to do that, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, can we have an understanding? Otherwise, I'm going to have a whole bunch of questions about best available science, because that's clearly not sufficiently addressed here. And if the functional isolation language is taken out, I'm not sure what guidelines staff have. So So I think it's just so important, and I really want to underscore again, are there parts of this that can be addressed to specifically go to some very specific concerns of property owners without having that broad administrative review? This is a specific question that I think we should consider, because if that's the main concern, then there we go. In regard to best available science, if it's felt that this should go forward with a broadening of administrative review, I want to know a lot more about how staff has determined that it is in keeping, the code is in keeping with best available science, specifically in the context of the recommendations of the Department of Commerce regarding code revision of the critical areas ordinance.
Sure. Okay, with that, we really do need to be moving on to our next public hearing. Today we're here to hold a public hearing on the George open space application. This is a hybrid public hearing. The public in the room who wish to testify, please make sure you've signed the entrance at the room. Those on Zoom wishing to testify have joined by Zoom, phone, emailed in comment, or mailed in comment. If you wish to testify, please choose the raise your hand option. If you are dialing in, press *9 to raise your hand. The chair will call your name and unmute you when it is your turn to speak. Make sure you choose *6 to unmute yourself. If you have issues speaking, being heard, please disconnect from Zoom and call 360-972-6784. We will have a timer for public hearing for any public testimony. Each person will have 3 minutes to testify. I'll call out names for oral testimony. When you hear your name, please unmute yourself and you may turn on your camera to testify. Time may not be given to another person. When testifying, please provide your name and address for the record. And then, Holly, would you please review the timer?
Yes, you'll have 2 minutes, 30 seconds to speak where it will be green. And then at that point, it will turn yellow until 3 minutes. And at that point, it turns red and you're out of time.
Thank you very much. With that, this public hearing is now open. We will start out with the staff presentation from Chris Chapeau.
Thank you. I am in for Marissa. She had to be out due to a family emergency, so I will be reading. This evening, we are here to hold a public hearing on the George Open Space Program application. A little background on the Open Space Program. Open Space Tax Program is to conserve open space land with the Open Space Taxation Act, RCW 8434. This act requires the county governments with tax reductions granted if qualified property to grant tax reductions if qualifying properties are maintained in a rural undeveloped state. The proposed property is located on Case Road, south of 113th, north of Maytown Road, west of I-5, and east of Little Rock Road in unincorporated Thurston County. The application proposes to enroll 12.2 of their 12.12 of their 13.12 acres into open space under the significant wildlife habitat area and resource enhancement categories. They are subtracting 1 acre of the 1 acre for residential structures and their appurtenances on the property. The applicants propose to maintain open pasture for seasonal grazing using the prescribed grazing management plan approved by the Natural Resource Conservation Services, while improving and maintaining wildlife habitat associated with the on-site tributaries connected to Allen Creek. The George property meets the criteria for enrollment under the open space, wildlife, habitat area, and resource enhancement categories for 4 points, which is a 50% reduction based on the following factors included in RCW 8434 and the Thurston County Open Space Tax Program Guidelines. Supporting documents included habitat management plan, were submitted with their application materials. Important species listed within the critical areas ordinance were documented on site by a qualified biologist. U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Natural Resource Conservation Services biologists with expertise in Oregon spotted frog habitat have a verified on-site Oregon spotted frog habitat. And the applicant is developing and implementing a conservation grazing management plan to manage both invasive plants and allow grazing on the property. And this has been developed with the Natural Resource Conservation Services. Planning Commission held a workshop, a work session on April 20th on the current open space application and requested that this public hearing be set. Notice of the public hearing was published in the Olympian on April 26th. In addition, webmail announcements and a press release were issued on May 6th, and all neighbors within 500 feet of the parcel have been notified. To date, we have received one public comment, and that public comment was in favor of approving the enrollment of the George property into open space. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. We'll now ask for anybody in the public that would like to address the Planning Commission to raise their hand. Is there anybody that'd like to speak this evening on this issue? Christy White.
Hi, I apologize that I didn't get a chance to look at this application until just now. The only concern I have about it being open space, I mean, it's an amazing opportunity, but when you have livestock, that the plan presented by the owners is very in depth, only because, you know, livestock grazing, you know, could really interfere potentially with all that's being tried to be preserved, the frogs and all of the other wildlife, that it's really a strong grazing plan, because it's, you know, it's the majority of their property is falling into this. It's not open to the public, and that it really is a strong plan and tends toward the preservation for natural resource and frogs, and isn't just benefiting the grazing land. So that's just a thought. That's all I have.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to address the Planning Commission on this topic? Or anybody in the room? Okay, with that, I will close the public hearing and we will have a work session and all right, does anybody have any questions on this particular issue for staff?
I'll make a motion.
I actually have a question myself. I know that when we discussed this last time, we were going to try to get a thumbnail about how much money, what the economic impact is. Can you report on that?
I can report on that. So, and again, I'm going to read it. So Marissa did work with Dorena Baird of the county's assessor's office, and she has provided the following information, which is based on the 2022 market conditions. And this particular open space valuation would occur in the 23. So if the George parcel was enrolled in 2022 under the open space tax classification for the 12.12 acres with a 50% adjustment, The property tax difference would have been $440. The market value of taxes payable in 2023 have not been determined, nor is the levy rate, which is why they can't provide any information regarding the 2023 information.
So it's like 3 years for this to pay off for them at the earliest. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other comments on this particular Commissioner Hanson or Commissioner Pestinger? Oh. Nothing.
Nope.
No, thank you.
Commissioner Day.
Sorry, I don't have the materials for this piece, but what's the zoning designation person?
That I would have to look up for you.
Okay. I know it's 1 to 5. I don't know which one.
I don't know if it's triple R. I think it is based in that area, but I don't want to quote wrong.
Is there any other discussion you'd like to have on this particular piece? I would entertain a motion at this time.
I move that we recommend approval of the George open space application.
Motion has been approved and seconded as a recommended approval of classification of 12.12 acres of the George property as open space land for current use assessment. Any other discussion? Call for the vote.
Commissioner Helverson?
Aye.
Commissioner Casino?
Aye.
Commissioner Carmen?
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wheatley? Aye. Commissioner Simmons?
Aye.
Commissioner Day?
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson?
Aye.
Mr. Pessinger?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. All right. Well, with that, I think that we will move on to a work session on Shoreline Master Program with Focus.
Good evening, Commissioners. Andrew DeFovis, Interim Senior Planner with Community Planning. So staff have prepared a draft Planning Commission recommendation of the Shoreline Master Program that has been posted on the Planning Commission's website and also on the Shoreline Master Program update website. A brief memo has also been prepared and posted on the Planning Commission's website. I will also send around a direct email to the whole Planning Commission tomorrow because I realize I neglected to do that, connect you with that information. And then for Commissioner Day as well, I'll make sure that I get you some of the background materials on Shoreline Master Program. Coming from ecology, I know you're probably very familiar with it, but I prepared some intro materials for some of our newer commissioners a few months ago. I'll make sure you get those as well. So we're not going to dive into that tonight. I'm basically here to kind of advertise that this information is available both to the Planning Commission and for the public. So there is a clean copy version, and then there's a version that's marked up that shows all the edits that have occurred since the public hearing in October 2021. We want to make sure that you have a couple of weeks to review that information. So when we come back on June 1st, that will be the first opportunity for Planning Commission to have reviewed and ask any questions of staff if you have any. And I'm sure you will. So the changes that have been made since the public hearing include requested items from the Planning Commission. It includes things that went to public hearing as options for the public to consider. It includes items that the public suggested through the written and oral public comment period, and ongoing comments from and discussions with the Department of Ecology and community planning staff discussions. Also, the changes that were requested by Planning Commission on the shoreline environment designations over several work sessions have been completed, all except for one of those. We had to wait for a boundary line adjustment to be completed on Long Lake to actually see the parcels and be able to make those changes, but we've not lost that thread. All the rest have been changed. And that information in the memo, there's a link to that online tool that folks can use to check those things out. So as I mentioned in the marked up version, all the changes are reflected in strike through and underline, so you can see what has changed. And the memo that I put up online gives a kind of a broad overview of some of the more significant changes. It's not exhaustive, but some of the, again, changes that based on Planning Commission discussion, based on public testimony, I made all the changes. Non-conforming is now conforming per planning commission and public recommendation. How we refer to critical areas and how shoreline jurisdiction is characterized has all been edited for clarity and consistency with the Shoreline Management Act, or represents a significant step toward that goal. I corrected internal consistencies where I was made aware of them and added definitions that the public and planning commission wanted to see in that document. So those are some of the examples of the changes that have been made, but please review, and when we come back, I will field any questions that the planning commission has once you've had time to absorb that information. And I'm also developing some more information for you specifically on the topic of agriculture related to options for agriculture buffers, and the whole concept of dormancy versus abandonment for agricultural uses was not quite cooked by the time I was ready to publish this. So I decided to just pull it and we'll come back and have that conversation when you reconvene. And ultimately, the conclusion of that session or session after, hopefully, document will be in good shape for the planning commission to issue a recommendation to the board. So I know there will be questions to come. Does anyone have any questions for me this evening?
Good.
I need a copy,
Okay.
a hard copy.
Yep, I can.
We can't do this on the computer.
I
don't know who else needs it, but
Same for me.
because and 2 weeks is enough time for me to read the whole thing.
Okay.
Because I'll read it word for word.
I think that is a conversation for the planning commission as to what your druthers would be.
I would think that after we get the copy and we come to our first meeting 2 weeks after that, we will be discussing it, but not forwarding a recommendation at that time yet. I can't imagine we get that all done in one meeting. I would imagine that we'll have to do one meeting, and that will probably have some final revisions. And in the next meeting, we would be able to hand the football to the BOCC. Does that sound halfway reasonable expectation?
I'm hoping at this point that the conversations are limited to the changes that have been made, and making sure it's
yes,
accurate based on the input, and also if you have questions about things that came from the public
Yes.
or ecology.
I'm
Yeah,
not
let's
interested in
focus there.
relitigating stuff we've been litigating for the last 10 years, only the few little minor issues that we've had over the last 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully we take a vote on it and send it off.
Would you like comments provided prior to our meeting if we have them?
You're welcome to provide them if you have them, but ultimately we would bring those and we'll share them with the planning commission, and the planning commission as a whole would then decide if there are issues they want to explore.
Yeah.
So please feel free to send me things if you have them.
And I should mention also at this time that if we do not have a unanimous vote on this SMP, that a minority report is hopefully will be produced, and the opportunity for that will certainly be given, because we would like to have every opinion within the planning commission forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners. Does anybody go ahead?
Sorry, just one maybe little thing that I could ask for before that meeting. And like you said, this thing's been gestating. Super long time.
Yeah.
So I'm just asking about like maybe the last year or something, but there are 3 people on the planning commission, and me, at least I don't feel like I'm up to speed on what the public comments were that you're answering to. So maybe if you could just throw in the matrix that was provided, to commissioners last year or whatever, whenever the hearings were that are relevant, just so that we have a sense of what you're responding to.
It's that thing.
Well, okay.
Computer.
Okay.
Just for the stuff
That's
that the
what I'm
last
saying.
couple issues.
Yeah,
Just for the
not
last.
10 years.
Yeah, I can send you, so all of the information since the dawn of SMP time will go forward to ecology, but the way that we parsed it for this particular period is when we published the planning commission public hearing draft, we kind of reset it. And so I can send when I send the links tomorrow, I can send, it's on the open house webpage. I can just kind of show you where to find that. And there's 10 volumes of public comment, and there's a cover sheet. So yeah, I can definitely connect you with that information.
I think it should probably also be noted that other than maybe Scott, nobody has been here since the onset of SMP deliberations. We're all new. So,
And if I could, I did have
Yeah.
one thought based on what Commissioner Carmen said about the length of time. I also agree that one work session will not be enough. However, one option could be, if the planning commission wanted to focus its review or questions on sections, say 100 up through 400 for the next meeting, that might be a way to break that up and attempt to tackle questions on that half of the document during that.
well, I guess
So,
if the planning commission recommendations have already been reflected in chapters 100 through 400, I don't know if we need to do a new deliberation on that. I mean, I'm ready to see this thing go.
I think we all are,
Yeah,
but also we don't know exactly what the changes
Yeah.
were. And so in order to.
But unless you see something egregious in 100 through 400, I think that we should let it go. Something that's different than what we decided.
I just think that 15th would be the earliest I'm ready to do.
15th would be the earliest you'd be ready to have that.
Start having discussions.
Okay,
I need to read it.
fair. No, fair. I want you to read it. I want you to read it. Okay. Anybody else have anything else for Andrew? Could you put me on our copy list?
yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got Commissioner Carmen, Commissioner Nelson, Commissioner Wheatley, Commissioner Simmons, and Commissioner Depp.
Do you want those picked up in person or mailed out?
Picked up.
Picked up?
Getting
I'd like a hard copy as well, if possible, please. This is
Yeah.
Commissioner Hanson.
Yes, Commissioner Halverson has an advanced copy because he's leaving town. This is what it looks like. It's
Can
about-
you get one for Commissioner Hanson as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
And when do you think they would be ready?
Probably next week sometime, I would think.
Can you send an email out saying come pick up your?
Yes, yeah.
See, that's
Yeah.
another reason I don't go 15.
Sure. No, that's fair.
That's what that takes a week off of it.
Yeah.
We will do the best we can to get those out as soon as we can.
All right. Boy. Why don't we do some staff updates then? Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
So I only have a couple of staff updates. The first is the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioner dinner. We do have a date, July 14th.
July 14th.
So staff will continue to do work on the logistics on the back end and we'll get you information out as we have it. But mark your calendars for 7/14.
All right.
At McCarty. Thank you.
6 p.m.
6 p.m. I think, 6:30. Yeah. Notice it appropriately. The other is just an update on hiring staff. We do still have an associate planner position open. The senior planner position did close. We are still making a moving through the hiring process for that particular position. We have also advertised for the agricultural community program manager position. So that one is out and will be actually out for 4 weeks.
Okay, so you're still 3 FTE short, but you're getting ready to fill one. We had a question earlier today, or somebody, I think it was Ms. Cronenberg, had said that over the course of the last 15 years, I think she said 2010 till now, that the actual amount of staff within resource stewardship, now CPED, has decreased, not just from staffing shortages, but the number of FTEs that are designated to that department. Is that true?
So staffing has ebbed and flowed over time. There have been staffing decreases. We were hit with the Great Recession and staffing did have to be reduced at that point in time. We have also staffed up over the last few years. So I can get information regarding where we were pre-recession and where we are currently as far as a department is concerned, but I wasn't working here at that time.
Well, I guess I don't know if I actually need to know like a historical staffing record or anything like that, but if, we have, our docket is super full and it's always super full and we're always only going to get to about half of it. If we had more staff, would the planning commission be able to handle more? And is this something that like when I go to Mercados on July 14th and I see a county commissioner, maybe I want to say, I think CPAC could use a few more people in there.
So what I could say is that my division, we have the most people we have had in a decade, even recession, pre-COVID, pre-recession. So that goes all the way back to 2009. 2008, 2009. The division itself had been staffed with as many as, at that point, 4 to 6 planners for long-range planning. We now have a staff of 20, and they're not all planners. We do have water monitoring and data and hazard services along with us. So we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 planners, both environmental and what we consider traditional long-range planners, are GMA experts. So
when we finally do get to our next really huge project is going to be comp plan, and we're still a couple of years out from that. Will we have one senior planner dedicated to that, or?
Yes, we will have one senior planner dedicated to that and probably a couple of associate planners.
Okay.
We will also be requesting professional services dollars and the budget for that, but that's a budget decision for the Board of County Commissioners.
One FTE is not going to handle comp plan.
No.
Okay. Okay. All right. Does anybody have any other staff questions?
I don't know if it's a staff question, but it's just a thought, kind of related to the conversation at the beginning of the meeting. I've been here, well, not as long as Scott, but I've been here for one term, like for planning committee. So I'm just wondering, maybe it is time that we have a work group of some sort to kind of review how we do things and how maybe
Our rules of procedure?
Yeah, and outline how maybe we can outline how to do the agenda or something. Rather than right now. So I see that.
I don't know how you folks feel about it, and we're certainly open to suggestions, but I will be having a conversation with both Ms. Chapeau and Mr. Cummings in July, and at that time, I can talk to them about that, about how the best way to reopen rules of procedure and updating those would go. Because that's something that, while we have a ton of discretion there, I certainly don't want to be assuming roles for the other people that are involved, including Phil. I don't want to assume the role of staff.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. It does seem like it's time to kind of review what we're doing.
It's been 2013 since it was done. So yeah.
That's.
No, since changes have been made.
Since changes have been made.
We've had reviews.
Okay.
Over the years.
Have there been updates since 2013?
I
don't
can't tell you
remember.
off the top of my head.
Go ahead.
As a new kind of person to this, it feels to me like we're almost on the issue we were talking about at the beginning. It feels like we might be having what are traditionally minutes, which aren't that expressive usually, and try to do the work of something more like a report. That was my first impression.
Yeah. All right. Well, if we can hold off a general planning commission conversation on rules of procedure, I will go to staff first to gather input, and then come back and have that conversation if that's okay with everybody else. That's not too presumptuous. Sure. Okay, thank you. Is that all right? Okay. With that, we'll go on to calendar. For June 1st, we are anticipating more SMP and wireless follow-ups. Are we gonna do this? Oh, we're not gonna do it. No,
I need more than a week.
Need more than a week, okay.
And we got all kinds of new people.
I mean, I think we should start
the discussions.
Because if we go through and everybody says, okay, well, I've made it to 400, let's go through to 400. Let's not take the whole night and say we're not doing SMP because I might have not got through the whole document.
I think that's fair. I think that leaving SMP on the tentative schedule, knowing that we will probably not get all the way through it, we will probably not be ready for a recommendation. But if there are some discussions we could have Andrew there for, that would be great. If that's okay with you, Andrew.
First 3 chapters should be
okay.
Pretty simple.
Okay.
Definitions.
I don't know.
It's but we have
Definitions. Oh, I
can't change.
I'm not going to relitigate a whole bunch of stuff that's been in there for 15 years. So For the June 1st meeting, is anybody expecting that they won't be able to be there?
I won't be here in person. I'm gonna try to log on.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, for our June 15th meeting, we should be talking about SMP again. And then the boundary line adjustment code amendment. Is there anybody that does not expect they will be here for the June 15th meeting? It looks like we'll have everybody here. That would be great. We still have 15 minutes left. I am inclined to invite Ashley back to talk about
I wanted to just invite. Thank
So
you for inviting me.
Well, we're gonna use it for another 15 minutes, but I think we should take advantage of the time while we can. I know that, do you have anything else for Ashley on this that you want to? Not just for what to bring back, I mean, we just had a work session to a certain degree.
No, not really. No, that's not true.
Commissioner Hanson or Commissioner Pessinger, we haven't heard a lot from you this evening. Do you have anything for Ashley?
No.
No, just a general thing.
Okay.
Thank you to the staff and welcome to Derek.
This was kind of short notice to bump back over to her, so if nobody's prepared to ask her a lot of questions, that's fine, but I didn't want to waste the time if we didn't have to, so go ahead, Doug.
Well, in my notes, I had under the functional isolation section, the 2B. I just wrote explain. I didn't understand, so I need to know better about what that means. It's not evident to me. So maybe what Fish and Wildlife said would help me to understand that portions of it.
Yeah,
That's fine.
please.
I think you probably covered it with graphics and whatnot in your discussions around the shoreline management program, but essentially, like, imagine a single family home. If there's a wetland and a single family home, in some cases, because that single family home is there, or there's a road or a railroad trestle, the buffer behind that single family home or whatever other, ooh, look, whiteboard. Thank you. It may be functionally, well, it is functionally disconnected or potentially functionally disconnected. The question is whether it provides any type of biological or hydrological function. So when you have this sort of cutoff, it's worth taking a look to see if that buffer area is still providing any function as it relates to the critical area. As you talk about, like, Fish and Wildlife, you know, obviously if there's a big tree that's there that is providing habitat, it is therefore providing biological function and would therefore not be subject to this provision and would have to go through a critical area review permit or reasonable use exception, whatever one they fall into for a project.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Is isolation is the isolation word part of the problem here? Because functionality is one thing, and like the example you just gave, like for critical areas, especially Fish and Wildlife, you know, did like 2 volumes on best available science, and one of the things they said was that riparian function has to be considered. So, you know, being wherever you are in relation to the wetland or whatever it is that the critical area is protecting, you know, you can't assume just because there's a house in the way that it's not working as a riparian area. And that is something that they're really in their 2018, you know, release on best available science. They said that was important. And I think one of the people, I don't remember if it was about this, but one of the folks during the hearing talked about, oh, no, it was at the opening comment, Phyllis Farrell was saying, you know, please consider climate change. And, you know, that adds a whole other dimension. And one of the issues that has become important is maintaining migratory corridors. So, you know, there are new elements of the science that are emerging all the time. And if we're talking about going up to 2040, you know, yikes, you know, Douglas fir trees or the forest is going to be considerably reduced by then, according to the studies on, you know, climate impacts in the state. So does this concept of isolation, like where does that come from in the scientific literature? Because there's functionality, but where's this concept of isolation coming from?
So I can find it dating back to, at least as it relates to Department of Ecology, to 2014 is probably the most recent, where they specifically talk about buffers and talk about functionally disconnected, wetlands and functionally isolated. For WDFW, it's a 2020 guidebook. They don't delve into the functional isolation as clearly as, you know, Department of Ecology does. And so in my conversations, and I just chatted with them today because they wanted to submit a comment, that's WDFW. They actually sent out our proposed code amendments to the whole South Sound region of their WDFW staff, oh, that's a mouthful, I'm sorry, to have them take a look at it. And they felt comfortable with it, with this concurrent review, which was their suggestion. You know, in cases where behind that house, it's been paved and used as a driveway and there's no habitat in existence, they might be willing to say there's no biological or hydrological function. As suggested for amendments, if we put that concurrent review in there, this provision won't apply if either our staff find or WDFW staff find that there is still function there. This is really to address situations where there is no function.
So why do you need isolation?
That's actually what Department of Ecology uses, and what we had used here at the county when we adopted the critical areas ordinance, because the wetland section of our Title 24 already has a provision for functionally isolated buffers. And so trying to be consistent with that rather than opening that up and changing the language used there, I just used that language when we updated this or put together proposed code updates for this section to Title 24. Functionally disconnected is used very frequently as well.
I think my question, it follows off of the line of questioning here, is functionally isolated the right, is that really the right standard? If we're talking about critical areas that aren't necessarily wetlands, if that's a wetland specific designation.
What, is there another term or that you're thinking of, or?
I mean, I think the question would be, like, would this really only apply to wetlands? If we're talking about functional isolation, which it's intended for, essentially hydrologic function, from what I understand. But we're talking about a whole suite of critical areas ordinances that might apply. So maybe there's a way to understand, to describe the intent here, which is really talking about a critical area that is essentially not functional or not contributing in a meaningful way to the broader ecosystem function, which I would have trouble identifying a critical area that wasn't doing something like that. Functional isolation is specifically hydrologic from what I understand. So maybe it's too narrow a term for a broader set of issues.
I'm just standing here to draw.
You're the artiste.
I am the very bad artist.
And I guess,
If this is the same line.
Go ahead. No, we want to hear it all. We got 7 minutes, 6 minutes.
I'm just brainstorming if you see me.
And not knowing that much about exactly how we do our business here, with the packet that staff provided. So we heard a lot of testimony about like the impacts to resources that changes like this would allow. And in my experience, like, we're burdened by this legacy of development, heard it in public testimony, that was done for our modern standards that we have for permit requirements, things like stormwater. We just know so much more, have a lot better regulations. And I honestly see this as an opportunity to bring people into and up to modern standards. And I think that gets missed. I wonder if there's something maybe add to the report that covers that issue because it was so prevalent in folks'. Go ahead, Commissioner Lee.
Yeah, unless somebody online has a comment. Okay. Yeah, and in that regard, I mean, it's my understanding from reading, I'm certainly not as deep in it as you, but you know, I went to the Department of Commerce website. I mean, they're doing webinars on how to do policy change. I mean, there's just tons. There's so much material you can hardly get through it. You know, it seems to me that one of the principles that came through there was that you change a critical area ordinance when it's not protective, when it's not doing its job. And that's the criterion of not doing its job, is it's not protective. And we seem to be hearing comments that there's concern that if these changes went through, it would be less protective. So that's a serious matter, because a bigger question is, when do you decide to change the critical areas ordinance? From what I understood from Commerce, you kind of monitor, you know, you monitor how your policy is doing, and if you got a problem, you fix it. Now, you know, earlier when we were talking about this, we asked the question, how many cases are we talking about a year? And it came down to about 1 a year. Okay, so I think you could make an argument that it's doing its job of being protective if it's coming down to one application going to a hearing examiner every year. You know, the flip side of that is, you know, is that incredibly burdensome to the owners of the property who know that these rules apply. This question of why that I raised at the very beginning, why are we looking at this? Because we've been talking about the comp plan. Am I correct in thinking that one of the things that gets reviewed is the critical areas ordinance? And wouldn't it? It's not. So
we review that separately.
Okay, so how is the critical areas ordinance reviewed sort of systematically? Is it reviewed on some kind of a schedule or through? Okay, so why not wrap this into that review process? Because maybe some of the things here could apply more widely, some of the things more narrowly. But why are we, you know, how normal is it and how necessary is it to pull out this one thing? And is that what you'd usually do with the critical areas ordinance when it's not, because you figured out it's not protective? I mean, why are we just looking, you know, why is this, like, when is the next time we're going to be looking at the thing?
Well, what I understood from our last conversation and from conversations with two different commissioners is that there was several individuals that came forward and talked to the commissioner specifically, and that talked to CPED specifically about this ordinance being too restrictive and too prohibitive. And like every regulation and stuff, sometimes when they're initially applied, they go way this direction. And sometimes you have to pull them back just a little bit to make them more centrist. And that's kind of the explanation that I received for why this particular change, 827, was done, is because it was too prohibitive, too restrictive, and it didn't need to be that way. I mean, there have been several things done, I think, by yourself with the Department of Ecology and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and everybody else as to, you know, does this change affect what we're doing with restoring habitat or creating new habitat or anything like this? And they basically said no, that it is within line with what we have already established. But it just makes it for a cleaner process for the citizens of the county. And that's what the commissioners were looking at, is
how can we make a better process, a less expensive process? Because you got to admit, I mean, anybody that's applied for a permit in this county, they know it's expensive. Permit is expensive and it's very time consuming. I mean, I will tell you from personal experience, friends and neighbors that wanted to get a permit to build, it took them 2 to 4 years. And some of them basically just said, oh, the heck with that. I'm gonna go ahead and do what I need to do anyway. And one of them cut down 5 acres of trees and got a $5,000 fine. And I, why did you do that? He says, well, it was either that or wait 4 or 5 more years. And it all had to do with the gopher thing initially, okay? And that's why the whole thing started with the pocket gopher and the habitat conservation plan, which I think everybody's kind of on board with. But if you don't have regulations and stuff that are centrist, that allow some flexibility and changes to be made, then you're going to have the public, the people out there that own property and stuff, start doing things that you don't want them to do. I mean, we've had 2 people in here tonight that have been trying for years to make changes to their property legally. And they're getting so frustrated with the process. And a lot of them are that way. Those are just 2 that showed up. There's a lot more that the commissioners hear about, that we all hear about in our different areas and stuff. And I think if we ignore that and don't make what I consider prudent changes, then we just subject ourselves to people making changes on their own without going through a permit process. And that's not good. I've seen it not be good.
I think that, did you have something you wanted to say, Scott?
So I just wanted to, a couple things as to why we changed. I don't think we just change critical areas because we think they're not protected enough. We change them when we think there's something wrong with them. Number 2, when we make changes to critical areas, development code, comp plan all the time. That's, I mean, obviously we've been working on shoreline for a while, but that's most of what we do. And we don't wait for the review, because we've got these long reviews. Sometimes we just, like I can tell you from experience, we set up the critical areas ordinance and it was, basically it's all in theory. How do we do this? How is this going to work? And I think in this case, we have a case where staff, community members came to staff came to the board, and the board said, go look at this. And so I think we should have more discussions about whether or not, it should be more about whether or not we're going to do this. And the other thing, the last thing I'll say is, we heard about no net loss. That's a lot about no net loss and best available science tonight. We did not hear anybody talk about the goals of growth management. And everything we do that's growth management related, we have to consider all of the goals of growth management.
All right, I think that we're going to finish this conversation for now. We're going to obviously be talking about this a whole lot more. Thank you very much. Did you want to close anything out?
I just wanted to, I will be updating the proposed code amendments, given some of the feedback we've received, and it sounds like, are the commissioners okay with me looking at the functional isolation section and maybe rewording that? If, depending on how we reword that, incorporating WDFW's comments, and looking at the time frame for rebuilding.
Thank you. Do we have anything else for good of the order?
No.
Yes, Commissioner.
Well, I just wanted to respond. I mean, the Growth Management Act, you could look at that because it talks about critical areas. Oh, here it is. And countywide planning policies, RCW 3670 and 210. County and each city shall designate critical areas, agricultural lands, forest lands, and mineral resource lands, and adopt development regulations concerning these designated agricultural lands, forest lands, mineral resource lands, and protecting these designated critical areas. So there is a difference.
All right. So with nothing else for the good of the order and all of our business having been completed for the day, this meeting is adjourned.